For 36 hours, the most media-controlled family on Earth said nothing. The most-watched interview in a generation had just gone out to the world, filmed in a garden, calm as a confession. And inside it were claims a monarchy simply cannot survive being true. And the whole planet leaned in to hear one thing: the denial, the answer, the fight back. When it finally came, it was 61 words long. 61. You could read the entire response of a 1,000-year-old institution to the worst accusation of its modern life in the time it takes to boil a kettle. And buried in the middle of those 61 words was one phrase so perfectly engineered that it outlived everything around it. It was meant to end a war. Instead, it became the name we remember the war by. 3 words. Recollections may vary. But that isn't even the phrase that should stop you cold. 4 words near the end do that. The promise that the matter would be addressed. And then 1 word. Privately. That is the tell. That is the box I'm going to open for you. Because a family accused in front of 100 million people chose to answer them in public, and then swore to deal with it where no one could ever watch. Hold that contradiction in your head. By the end, it explains not just this statement, it explains every royal story I have ever told you. Let me rewind, because to understand why 61 words mattered this much, you have to understand what they were answering. In early 2021, 2 people who had left the royal family sat down for an interview that would be watched by tens of millions on its first night alone, and hundreds of millions after. I'm going to be very careful here, and I'm going to stay careful the whole way through, because it matters. In that interview, they made allegations. They said things about their time inside the institution, about how they were treated, about their mental health in their darkest moments, and, most explosively, an allegation that within the family there had been a conversation, a concern raised about the skin color of their future child. That is their account. That is what they alleged. I am not here to tell you it happened, and I am not here to tell you it didn't. I could not prove it to you either way, and neither could anyone shouting about it online. What I can talk about, what this entire video is actually about, is not whether the accusation is true. It's what the palace did next. Because the response is the one part of this story that is fully on the record, 61 words of it. And the response is where the real self-sabotage lives. So the interview airs, and then comes the silence. Not seconds, not minutes, days. And I want you to sit in those 2 days with me, because they are the first crack, and almost nobody talks about them. Think about what that silence is doing in real time. Every hour, the palace says nothing. The interview is the only version of events in the world. It plays on every network, every front page, every phone. A story with no reply isn't a disputed story, it's just the story. And an institution whose entire survival depends on controlling the narrative was, for 2 full days, letting someone else hold the pen. That is not calm. That is not dignity. That, as you will see, is a machine that did not know what it was allowed to say. If this is the kind of breakdown you actually want, the royal story told through how the palace communicates, the receipts, the strategy, without the fairy tale and without the pitchfork, do me one small favor before we open the box. Tap subscribe. This is the final chapter of a long series, and it genuinely helps more than you'd think. Now, let's get to why those 2 days ended the way they did. Because here is the pattern, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Every single royal crisis of the modern era runs on the exact same reflex. Something explosive happens. The instinct, every time, is not to explain. It's to go quiet, close the doors, and wait for the weather to change. It worked for decades, because for decades, the palace controlled the weather. Slower news, deferential press, no phone in every pocket. Silence used to be a fortress, But watch the ladder of what that same reflex has cost, because we've walked every rung of it together on this channel. A prince accused, and the family's move is distance and silence. Let the limb go quiet and hope it detaches on its own. A vanished duchess, weeks of no explanation, and the silence doesn't calm the internet, it feeds it, until the theories are louder than any truth could have been. A photograph the palace couldn't stand behind, pulled back without a real explanation, and the vacuum where the explanation should have been became the story instead. A scandal reaches a file, a document, an email, and again the reflex fires. Say nothing, address it privately, wait it out. Every time, the same instinct. Not a decision made fresh each time, a reflex, older than any single person in the building. And every time, in a world that now moves at the speed of a screenshot, that instinct doesn't protect them. It convicts them. Because here is what silence assumes, that if you say nothing, nothing fills the space. But nothing never fills the space anymore. The internet fills it. The theories fill it. The other side's version fills it, uncontested, on a loop, forever. Silence used to be a fortress. Now silence is just an empty room that everyone else gets to decorate. Now silence is a verdict. Remember that line. It is the thread that ties this whole series into a single knot. So now, let's open the box. Let's actually take the 61 words apart, phrase by phrase, and watch a public relations disaster assemble itself in slow motion. Not because the people who wrote it were fools, but because they were trapped. It opens soft. A line about the whole family being saddened to learn how hard the last years had been. Read that as a human being, and it's warm. Read it as a strategist, and something is already wrong. Saddened to learn. Learn. As if the family is hearing about years of pain for the first time, on television, along with the rest of us. In one word, the statement admits the institution was on the outside of its own family's suffering. That is not the language of a family that was close and is now wounded. That is the language of a family finding out in public. Then the pivot. The issues raised, and here they name it, carefully, generally, particularly that of race, are described as concerning. Now stop. Feel the size of that word. Concerning. The most serious allegation in the whole interview, the one that could genuinely threaten the standing of the crown across the world, and the chosen adjective is concerning. Not false. Not we categorically reject this. Not this did not happen. Concerning. When you are innocent of a thing, you deny the thing. You do not call it concerning. Concerning is what you say about an accusation you cannot afford to confirm and cannot bring yourself to deny. And here, put yourself in that room for a second. You're the person holding the pen. It's the middle of the night. A monarch is waiting. The lawyers are telling you not to admit anything, because admission has consequences that reach across continents. The reputation managers are telling you not to deny anything, because a denial that later collapses is 1,000 times worse than a soft word now. And the family is telling you not to be cruel to two people they still, on some level, love. 3 forces, pulling 3 directions, and only 61 words to satisfy all of them. Now write it. You can't. Nobody could. What comes out of that impossible room is not a message. It's a compromise wearing the costume of a message. And that is precisely what concerning is. A word chosen because every stronger word was forbidden. And then the phrase, the famous one, that while some recollections may vary, the issues would be taken seriously. Recollections may vary. Say it out loud and hear what it actually does. It doesn't say, you're lying. It doesn't say, we did nothing wrong. It says, there are 2 memories here, and they don't match. And we're not going to tell you which one is real. It is a masterpiece of saying nothing. It is the sound of a lawyer and a diplomat fighting inside one sentence, and neither of them winning. It was designed to be dignified and neutral. Instead, it landed as the most quotable non-denial of the century. Because the entire world instantly understood that recollections may vary is what you say precisely when you cannot say no. And then the ending. The part I told you to hold on to. That these matters would be addressed by the family privately. Privately. After a public accusation watched by the entire planet, the promise is to handle it out of sight. Now, in a normal family, that's decent. Wounds heal better off camera. But this is not a normal family. This is an institution that had just been accused, in public, of something with public consequences. And its answer to a public wound was to pull the curtain. Do you see the trap now? You cannot answer a global, public allegation with a private process and expect the public to feel answered. Privately doesn't close the story. Privately tells 100 million people you will never actually get the truth. And a story that can never be resolved is a story that never ends. Which is exactly why we are still talking about 61 words years later. Put the whole thing together and look at what it is. It is warm where it should be firm. It is vague where it should be exact. It calls a race allegation concerning instead of denying it. Floats recollections may vary instead of saying no. And promises privately to a world that was watching in public. Every single choice is defensible on its own. Stacked together, they spell out one message the palace never intended to send. We cannot deny this, so we will manage it. That is the box. And once it's open, you can't close it. Now, I have to be fair, because fairness is the whole point of this channel. There is a reading of those 61 words that is genuinely sympathetic, and I want you to actually weigh it, because this is where the room splits. 2 chairs. Sit in the first one. In the first chair, this was dignity. Restraint. A family that had just been ambushed on the world stage and chose not to brawl in public. From this chair, recollections may vary isn't a dodge, it's grace. It's the refusal to call 2 grieving people liars in a press release. It's an elderly monarch declining to drag a private grief into a public shouting match. And privately isn't evasion. It's the last dignified instinct of an institution that still believed some things are settled behind closed doors, not litigated on television. From this chair, the palace didn't fail. It behaved like the last serious adult in a room full of cameras, and got punished for it, because the modern world mistakes silence for guilt. Now get up. Sit in the second chair. In the second chair, this was fear. From here, every soft word is a place where a denial should have been and wasn't. You do not call a race allegation concerning if you can look the world in the eye and say it's false. You do not say recollections may vary about something you know did not happen. You say it didn't happen. From this chair, the gentleness isn't grace. It's the sound of an institution that could not risk a firm denial, because a firm denial can be disproven, and privately is where inconvenient truths go to be buried, not healed. From this chair, 61 words weren't restraint. They were an alibi with good manners. And here is the question I actually want you to answer, because it's the question this whole series has been circling from the very first video. When the palace went quiet, was that a family that wouldn't deny it out of dignity? Or a family that couldn't deny it out of fear? Wouldn't or couldn't? Those are the 2 chairs. They lead to completely different worlds, and the 61 words fit both perfectly, which is exactly why they were written that way. Tell me in the comments. 1 word, wouldn't or couldn't? Dignity or an institution that could not say no? I read them, and on this one, the finale, I already know the split is going to tear the room in half. So don't just watch. Pick a chair. Now sit for a second in the loneliest part of it. Because whichever chair you chose, look at what those 61 words did to the people inside them. They didn't just fail to answer two people who'd left. They cut a rope. After that statement, the distance between the family and the couple who walked away didn't shrink. It hardened into something that hasn't closed since. Think about the sheer loneliness sitting inside 61 words. Somewhere behind them is a father and a son who no longer speak the way they used to. Brothers who grew up sharing everything, now negotiating through lawyers and biographies. A grandmother who signed off on a phrase that would follow her family long after she was gone. Every one of those private griefs got compressed into a single public paragraph, so careful it couldn't hold any of them. That's what a non-denial really costs. It doesn't just fail to win the argument. It leaves everyone inside it more alone than they were before. Because now, even the people who love each other can only speak in language a lawyer approved. And the institution was left holding a phrase it never wanted to be famous for. A punchline stitched onto its own name. The people who wrote those words were trying to protect a monarch, protect a family, protect 1,000 years of continuity. And the thing they produced became the single most quoted line of the entire feud, thrown back at them on mugs and t-shirts and headlines for years. They reached for silence to make it smaller. Silence made it immortal. And that is where this series has to end. Not with an answer, because I promised you at the start I wouldn't pretend to have one, but with the pattern, finally whole. Go back through every story we've walked together. The arrest that was met with distance. The disappearance that was met with a vacuum. The scandal met with a sealed file. The accusation met with a closed door. And now, the most serious allegation of them all, met with 61 words that carefully, beautifully, refuse to say no. It is always the same reflex. Go quiet. Address it privately. Wait for the weather. It is the oldest royal instinct there is, and in the modern world, it has failed. Every single time. In public, in front of all of us. The monarchy keeps trying to win the 21st century with a 19th century move. And the phrase, "recollections may vary," is what that failure sounds like when you finally say it out loud. So here's where I leave you, at the end of the whole thing. Every door in this story is the same door, and it will not close. Because a family that answers the biggest questions in the world with its smallest voice doesn't end the conversation. It guarantees the conversation outlives them. The interview can't be unaired. The 61 words can't be unsaid. And the choice underneath them, to manage instead of to answer, to whisper instead of to deny, is the exact choice I've shown you the palace make in every chapter of this series. If you've just found this, don't stop here. This is the last piece of a much bigger picture. The arrest, the vanishing, the file, the photo, the phrase. Go back and watch the whole series from the beginning. There's a playlist, and I promise you, once you've seen the pattern in one story, you cannot stop seeing it in all of them. Watch them in order, and this finale hits completely differently. And then tell me the one thing I can't stop asking myself, now that we're at the end. If silence is no longer a fortress, if every quiet answer just makes the story louder, then here is the real question this whole series was built to ask. Is the monarchy staying silent to protect its dignity? Or is it staying silent because it has finally realized that the one thing more dangerous than answering the question is what happens the day it actually has to? I'll see you in the comments.